So my name is Tony Zielinski. I'm the Director of IT at Alaska Communications. I have Matt Hartford as manager of IT at Alaska Communications, and Patrick Kelly is our enterprise architecture, also at Alaska Communications. We're projecting, from Gartner, is projecting nearly 119 million tablets to be deployed this year, so it's coming. And trying to find out how many mobile platforms and OSs are going to be in the company that are supported. And in 2010, there was only a small number that had 1 to 4. That was majority of the customers that were surveyed, and only a few had 20 or more. But looking a year later, 12 months later, into 2011, and now we're into 2012, almost in every category we've doubled, and it's projected through 2012 that that's going to even further advance. So I don't know what 2013 is going to bring for us, other than I think tablets are going to be prominently, the heavy user of the enterprise work environment. For companies, including Alaska Communications, in order for us to stay competitive, we got to figure out how to bring tablets into the workplace. Our workforce, our younger workforces, if you look at them, they're all wanting to bring their own tablets in. They're bringing their smartphones in. And as I was mentioning, a colleague of mine, we're at a career fair with 7th and 8th graders. And they were interested in IT, and we asked the question, how many of you have a tablet or an iPhone? And I think about 95 to 98% of the students out of 100 raised their hand and said they all have it. So these are our future workforce people, right? They're going to come in, and they don't want the laptops, they don't want the desktops, they don't want to be chained, they want mobility, they want access to data and speed of access. So the adoption of tablets must be driven by the benefit to the organization if we're going to make this a real value add to the company and to the enterprise. Looking at the numbers here, and we talk about email, that's predominantly what's been the driver for it, access to email, but it's increased productivity too. I'm talking to my colleagues over the last couple of days. I know for me personally, I've probably added about 4 hours of my own productivity to Alaska Communications because I'm always on. I mean, I wake up in the morning, there's no 5-minute boot up on a laptop, and I'm already checking email, I'm checking information, I'm looking at things, and I end my nights almost the same way. I mean, and I think that's a common thread for all of us. And I think from an enterprise standpoint, it would be silly for us to not try to adopt a policy and a process to bring in tablets for us. So here's where we get into the fun. I'm going to turn this over to Matt Hartford. He's got a lot of more in-depth work on tablets as well as security.
It's incumbent on us as IT professionals and as the people who are enabling this functionality, not just to react once the data is already left. It's our jobs to also prevent it as best we can. But there's a certain balance between too much and not enough. And knowing where that's at is going to come with maturity and time and using these things. What we're talking about here are some of the tools that are available. We start looking at the statistics, the top security threats, the application vulnerabilities themselves. Those aren't really new. But what is new is 66% is mobile devices. Now, we've talked a lot about tablets in this device and devices, but I think I'm looking around the room. I've watched, I don't know, 6 or 8, maybe even 10 people checking their smartphones, checking what they've got on them. Those devices are no different. These are real life threats. We're carrying around our company's data with us everywhere we go now. When we start talking about managing these devices, the reality is as soon as we start attaching everyone else's devices, the BYOD, as soon as these devices start attaching to our networks, that's part of our network. That's ours now. And we have to determine as professionals, how do we allow that data to leave our network? Because it is leaving your networks, right? So we start talking about content filtering, the data roaming that comes with it. How do we control that stuff, the troubleshooting, the application install control? How do we stop people from using their devices the way they want to, but still have access to our networks, our data, right? That, they've got a cool app that their buddy installed, or their kids are using their device in the evenings, and they're installing these apps off iTunes and Google. The Android devices are even more in terms of their ability. It's not controlled by the iTunes store. They can install anything they want. How do we know those things are good? And when they bring them back to our networks, how do we know that we're comfortable with what they've done when they were away? You know, these are the realities of these devices. I mean, they're incredibly powerful, and we shouldn't look the other way and remote wipe the devices. How do you have a user come back to you and say, "Hey, I left my iPad at interface. Sorry." You know, did your applications that you installed enforce a password? Do they have to have a password? A lot of them don't. You know, did anybody think that through before they did that? And then now that it's gone, how do you make sure that that data is protected? Malware. So I read a really cool statistic on my way over about, in 2011, 4% of the links on the internet had a potential for malware for the mobile device. In 2012, they said it could spike as high as 36%. That's a big number. You know, think about just the number of devices you've got out there, and they're almost 40% at risk. Holy cow. If you haven't already lost control of your data, to some degree it's a reality. Email is clearly one of the biggest threats. 84% now, another 16% in 2 years. That's 100%, that's everything. You know, your sales reports, your financial performance reports, you know, all of these kinds of things. I'm not going to read the whole slide to you, but as you're looking at them, you know, the people who have the most data with them at all times are the people who have these devices. You know, these are your directors and above. These are the people who have all the data, and they're walking around with it in a little tablet. Everyone talks about the cost of securing these devices, and they talk about the cost of what it's going to take to put this together. And you know what this slide is showing is, from the companies surveyed and sampled, what was a greater concern over cost was that security fear. What if we did lose it? Where would it go? What happens? You know, folks get really excited about that, and often those kinds of discussions are short as it relates to cost. But we start talking about filtering, you know, password policies, and we may have them on our networks, but we don't necessarily have them for the corporate device. And how do we enforce those policies? You know, email access, applications installed or not installed. You know, those are big deals, and they represent real threats to our networks. And obviously we talked about the ability to wipe the device and the security on the device itself. You know, how many people can force, "Hey, you missed your login 3 times, I'm going to wipe the device, sorry." You know, those kinds of things, and how many people's company would put up with that? But these are the kinds of things that we really do have to grapple with in this space. Selective wiping of business only. You know, that's absolutely possible and something that's enforced these days. Second authentication factors, RSA secure IDs, things like that. These are things that are absolutely things that you should be considering and looking at when you consider this challenge in the workspace.
You know, I wish I could say we have a grand scheme, you know, grand product deployment, but you know, the reality of it is it's not new. It's been out for about 2 years, but it's taken off like wildfire, and I think at least from an IT information technology standpoint, I don't think it's really something that we should turn our back to, because it's coming or it's here. So if you don't have a policy, I would strongly urge you to start working on it right away.